A single hug from a stranger awakens a little girl's courage and changes the lives of everyone who witnesses it. The ballroom was glowing that evening, filled with golden lights and the soft sparkle of chandeliers. The sound of violins and piano floated through the air, blending with the gentle laughter of guests in expensive gowns and suits. It was a charity gala, the kind of event where everyone was expected to smile, mingle, and dance. But in one corner of the grand hall sat a little girl, no more than 7 years old, clinging tightly to her father's hand. Her wide eyes looked at the dance floor, but her small body trembled, as if the very thought of stepping onto it was too much. Her father, a man known by many for his wealth and power, sat beside her, not as a billionaire that evening, but simply as a worried dad. He had built businesses, led thousands of people, and made decisions worth millions in a single day. But when it came to his daughter's fear, he felt powerless. He had tried softly whispering in her ear, encouraging her to go and dance with the other children, reminding her that everyone was having fun. But she only shook her head and buried her face deeper into his arm, refusing to let go. The music grew livelier. Children twirled on the polished floor, their shoes tapping in rhythm, their laughter bubbling like little fountains. The man's daughter watched them, her eyes filled with longing, but every time someone turned toward her or invited her to join, she shrank back, clutching her father's arm tighter. She wasn't just shy, she was afraid. The father's heart ached. Since her mother's passing 2 years ago, the little girl had changed. Once she had been full of giggles, twirling around the living room in her mother's dresses, making up silly songs. But after her mother was gone, the light in her had dimmed. Crowds made her anxious, new faces made her hide, and even at school she avoided other children. Dancing, something she once loved, now felt impossible to her, he thought. About the promises he had made to himself as a father, that he would protect her, guide her, give her everything she needed. He could buy the grandest toys, hire the best tutors, even book private holidays to keep her smiling. But he couldn't buy her courage, couldn't gift her the ability to stand in a room full of people and feel safe. Him deeper than any business failure ever could, the evening carried on. Elegant couples swayed together, old friends reunited, clinking glasses of champagne. But the billionaire's focus never left his daughter. He knelt beside her chair, lowering himself so that their eyes met. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You don't have to dance if you don't want to," he told her softly, though inside he wished she would. He wanted so badly for her to feel the joy of the music again, to find even a spark of the child she used to be. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. He sat back, a sigh escaping him. Around him, people greeted him, admired him, even praised his generous donation to the cause. But none of it mattered. Their words felt like background noise, because the only thing that truly mattered was the little girl sitting silently beside him. He remembered the times when his wife had been there. To guide their daughter through moments like this, she had always known what to say, how to comfort, how to coax a smile from their child even in the toughest situations. Now it was just him, and though he was strong in the boardroom, he often felt weak in the role of both father and mother. His daughter's fear reminded him of that. The little girl tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, can we go home?" Her voice was so small he could barely hear it over the music. His chest tightened. He wanted to scoop her up right then and leave, to take her back to the quiet safety of their home. But he also knew that leaving every time she was scared would only deepen her fear. She needed a reason to stay, a reason to believe she could be brave, but he didn't know how to give her that. As the night went on, he watched her watching the other children. There was a hunger in her gaze, a silent wish that she could be like them, running across the floor without worry, spinning and laughing as if the world carried no weight. She wanted it, he could see it, but something invisible held her back. The father placed his hand over hers, gently squeezing. "It's okay," he whispered again, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it for her or for himself. The truth was, he was afraid, too afraid, that his daughter would never find her way out of this shadow of fear, afraid that he would never be enough to help her. He had the world at his fingertips, yet he couldn't give her the one thing she truly needed, the freedom to be herself again. The music shifted into a slow, dreamy melody, Couples held each other closer. Children twirled like little stars, and laughter filled the air. But in that shining room, father and daughter sat in their quiet corner. Two hearts bound by love and fear, both wishing for something they didn't know how to reach. He kissed the top of her head, closing his eyes for a moment. One day he murmured silently to himself, "You'll dance again?" But that night, all he could do was hold her hand and sit with her, waiting for a miracle. He didn't know it was coming. The music in the ballroom kept playing, and laughter moved across the room like waves. Waiters carried trays filled with sparkling glasses, weaving smoothly through the crowd. Some guests were busy talking about business, others about fashion or travel. But in the middle of all that noise, one young waitress kept noticing something different. Her job was to smile, serve drinks, and remain invisible. But her eyes kept drifting toward the little girl sitting quietly in the corner with her father. She had been watching for a while, not out of curiosity, but out of a strange pull in her heart. Every time she passed that corner, she saw the same scene. The girl clutching her father's arm, her face half hidden, her eyes following the other children, but never daring to join them. The father tried to encourage her, leaning close to whisper words only she could hear. But the little girl stayed frozen. The waitress knew that look. It was the same look she had once carried as a child, fear mixed with longing. She had been shy too, painfully shy. The kind of child who would hide behind her mother's skirt at parties and refuse to speak when strangers asked her questions. She remembered how lonely it felt, watching other children play, wishing she could step forward, but feeling trapped by an invisible wall inside her chest. She carried her tray back to the kitchen, but the image of the little girl clung to her. Even while she was pouring drinks and arranging plates, she couldn't shake it off. She told herself it wasn't her place. She was there to work, not to involve herself in guests' lives. But her heart argued otherwise. There was something in the girl's trembling hands and big eyes that tugged at her memories so strongly that she felt she had to do something. When she walked back out, she slowed her pace near the corner. She noticed the father looking exhausted. Not in the way of a man tired from business meetings, but in the way of a parent carrying a burden too heavy for his heart. He had everything money could buy. Anyone could see that by the tailored cut of his suit and the whispers of his name among the guests. But at that moment, he looked like any other dad, helpless in front of his child's tears. The waitress hesitated. Should she speak? Should she just smile? She knew she could be scolded for overstepping her role. People like him probably weren't used to waitresses interrupting their evening. Yet something inside told her this wasn't about rich and poor, guest and staff. This was about a scared little girl who needed kindness. She took a breath and lowered her tray onto a nearby table so her hands were free. Then, with quiet steps, she approached the father and daughter. She crouched down gently so she wouldn't tower over the child. Her knees bent until her eyes were leveled with the little girl's. "Hi there," she said softly, her voice warm, careful, almost like a whisper. "The music is really pretty, isn't it?" The girl peeked at her, half curious, half cautious. She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. That small reaction gave the waitress hope. She remembered how, as a child, she hated when adults pushed too hard. The trick was patience, gentle words. "No pressure." The father looked at the waitress with mild surprise, but he didn't stop her. There was something about her presence, simple, kind, that made him let her try. The waitress smiled again, tilting her head slightly. "You know, I used to be scared of dancing too. When I was little, I thought everyone would laugh at me if I moved the wrong way." The little girl's eyes flickered, showing a tiny spark of connection. She still didn't speak, but her grip on her father's arm loosened a little. The waitress continued, her tone playful but gentle. "One time I even hid under a table at a party because I didn't want anyone to see me dance. Can you believe that? Under the table?" She gave a small laugh, light and genuine, not to make fun, but to show she understood. A faint smile touched the girl's lips before she quickly hid it again. The father noticed it, and his heart leaped. It was the first real reaction his daughter had shown all evening. The waitress didn't rush. She just stayed there, crouched at the girl's level, her hands resting calmly on her knees, showing she Wasn't going to force her into anything. She simply offered her presence. Sometimes she knew. That was enough to show someone they weren't alone. You don't have to dance if you don't want to, the waitress whispered kindly, echoing the father's earlier words, but with a softness that carried the weight of lived truth. But you also don't have to be afraid. Everyone here is just trying to have fun. Nobody's watching to see who's perfect. They're just happy to see smiles. The little girl shifted in her chair, glancing again at the children twirling. Across the floor, her body still trembled slightly, but the fear in her eyes wasn't as sharp as before. She looked at the waitress again, as though trying to decide if she could trust her. The waitress gave her the gentlest smile she could, one filled with reassurance. "Would you like to tell me your name?" she asked softly. The girl pressed, her lips together, thinking. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer, but then in the faintest whisper she said, "Lila." The waitress's heart warmed. "Lila," she repeated with care, as though it was the most important name she had ever spoken. It's such a beautiful name. It sounds like the kind of name that belongs to someone who can twirl like a star. Girl's cheeks turned pink, and though she lowered her gaze, she didn't hide completely. That was progress. Father watched, amazed, feeling his throat tighten. His daughter hadn't spoken a single word to anyone all evening, yet she had whispered her name to this stranger. The waitress didn't push further. She just stayed there, offering small, easy words, letting Lila feel safe. She told her about how the lights looked like stars, how the music sounded like a river, how sometimes it was okay to just listen without joining. Slowly, she began to weave a small bridge of trust. The father's eyes softened. Filled with gratitude he couldn't put into words. For the first time in a long while, he saw a flicker of light returning to his daughter's eyes. And it wasn't because of him, it was because a young woman who had nothing to gain chose to stop and notice. The waitress didn't know yet how much her small act of kindness was beginning to change not only the night, but the lives of everyone in that corner of the ballroom. The music inside the ballroom changed again, flowing into a softer melody that wrapped the room in warmth. The children were still laughing and spinning across the shiny wooden floor, their shoes tapping like raindrops. Lila kept watching them, her eyes wide, her fingers tightening around her dress. She wanted to move. She wanted to laugh like them, but her body refused. Her fear was still there, like a wall she couldn't climb. The waitress, still crouched beside her, noticed the hesitation in her eyes. She could almost feel the girl's longing and fear fighting inside her tiny chest. The father sat quietly, not wanting to break the fragile moment forming between his daughter and the stranger. His heart pounded as he waited, hoping something might finally shift. The waitress tilted her head gently, her voice soft as a feather. "Do you know something, Lila? Sometimes, when I was scared, the only thing that helped me was a hug." Lila looked up at her, uncertain. Hugs were safe with her father, but with someone new, it was different. Yet there was something warm in the waitress's eyes, something safe and gentle. "You don't have to," the waitress added quickly, making sure Lila didn't feel pressured. "But if you want, I can give you one. Just a small hug. No dancing, no big steps, just a hug." The girl's eyes flickered toward her father, silently asking if it was okay. He gave her a tiny nod, his throat tightening as he watched. Hesitated for a long moment, her little hands fidgeting in her lap. Then, almost shyly, she leaned forward. The waitress opened her arms, not rushing, simply waiting. When Lila leaned in, she wrapped her gently in a warm embrace. It wasn't long or dramatic. It was simple, soft, human. But in that hug, Lila felt something she hadn't in a very long time: safety with someone new. Her small body, tense at first, slowly relaxed. She breathed in the faint smell of vanilla and soap from the waitress's apron, and the warmth of another person who wasn't asking her to be brave, only offering comfort. The waitress whispered softly, "See? Nothing to be afraid of." The father's eyes blurred with tears. He had tried for months to help his daughter feel less alone, but here was a stranger. A young woman serving drinks, who had reached her heart with nothing more than kindness and patience. He covered his mouth with his hand, afraid the emotions inside him would spill out too strongly in front of everyone. Lila didn't say a word, but when she pulled back from the hug, her face looked different. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, but something had softened. The wall inside her chest had cracked, even just a little. She gave the waitress a tiny, almost secret smile. The waitress smiled back, her eyes shining. "You're braver than you think, Lila," she said quietly. "Sometimes being brave doesn't mean dancing or running around. Sometimes it just means letting someone give you a hug." The girl nodded slowly, as if the words were sinking into her heart. The father reached for his daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, and for the first time in months, there was a spark of light in her expression that wasn't shadowed completely by fear. The people around the Eagle room didn't notice what had just happened in that quiet corner. They were too busy laughing, talking, and enjoying the evening. But for the father, it was as if the entire world had stopped spinning just to give him this moment. A moment where his daughter, who had been lost in silence, was opening up again because of the hug of a stranger. The waitress stood slowly, smoothing her apron, but she didn't walk away yet. She stayed close, as if silently promising she would be there if Lila needed her again. She didn't realize that in that small act, she had already changed the entire course of the night. For Lila, the hug was more than just comfort. It was proof that maybe the world wasn't as scary as it seemed. That maybe there were people outside of her father who could be kind and safe. It was a seed planted deep inside her heart, a seed that might one day grow into courage. The father leaned back in his chair, his chest heavy with emotions he couldn't name. Gratitude, relief, sadness, and joy all mixed together. He blinked quickly, wiping his eyes before anyone noticed. But inside, he knew he had just witnessed something sacred, something money could never buy. It wasn't the ballroom, the music, or the wealth around them that mattered. It was that single, simple hug. The hug that made his daughter feel seen, safe, and a little less alone. And in that moment, he realized sometimes miracles come in the smallest, quietest gestures. The music in the ballroom rose into something brighter, the kind of tune that made even the shyest feet want to tap against the floor. The lights glittered over the polished wooden surface where the children spun in small circles, their laughter echoing like bells. For the longest time, Lila had only watched them, but now something inside her felt different. That hug had left her heart warm, as if it had broken the chains holding her back. The waitress was still near, not rushing her, not pushing her, only standing by with quiet encouragement. Lila looked at her father. His eyes were damp, though. He was smiling, trying to be strong for her. He gave her hand a small squeeze, and she understood without words he believed in her. Her little body shook as she slid off the chair. She landed softly on the floor, her shiny shoes pressing against the carpet. For a moment, her knees wobbled, and she almost turned back to the safety of her father's side. But then she felt the memory of the hug, the warmth of it, and she took a small step forward. The waitress bent slightly, offering her hand like a friend, not like an adult trying to lead a child. Lila stared at it, her lips pressing tightly together. Then slowly, she placed her tiny fingers into the waitress's palm. The waitress's grip was gentle, steady, like a promise that she wouldn't let go. Together, they walked toward the edge of the dance floor. The father followed with his eyes, hardly daring to breathe. His heart pounded so loudly he thought the people around him might hear it. For months, he had only seen his daughter retreat further into her shell. And now, she was walking toward the very place she had been too afraid to go. When they reached the floor, Lila stopped. The music sounded louder here, the children's laughter sharper. She froze, her shoulders curling as fear threatened to swallow her again. The waitress knelt down so they were eye to eye. "You don't have to do anything big," she whispered softly. "Just one step. Just one little move like this." She tapped her foot gently, almost like a secret rhythm between them. Lila blinked at her, then copied the small tap. It was barely more than a shuffle, but it was hers. The waitress clapped her hands softly in celebration, smiling so wide, made Lila giggle. That small laugh broke something open inside her chest. The waitress twirled lightly, just a small spin in her black shoes, and then held her hand out again. "Want to try?" she asked, Lila's eyes darted toward the crowd, then back to the waitress. Fear flickered, but so did curiosity. She took a shaky breath, held the hand, and let herself turn just once. A tiny twirl. Her dress swishing around her knees. The ballroom didn't notice at first. Everyone was too busy in their own world, but the father noticed. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. That single twirl was more beautiful than any dance he had ever seen, because it was his daughter's courage being born right before his eyes. Lila twirled again, a little bigger this time, and she laughed, clear ringing sound that hadn't filled the father's ears in what felt like years. It was the sound of his little girl returning to him. The children nearby stopped and stared. Instead of teasing, they welcomed her with smiles, clapping their hands in rhythm to the music. "Come on," one of them called happily and without hesitation. Lila joined them. Her steps were still small, a little clumsy, but she was moving. She spun, she laughed, she stumbled, then tried again. Every time she looked back, the waitress was there, smiling, nodding, making sure she knew she wasn't alone. Guests began to notice. Conversations grew quieter as eyes turned toward the little girl on the floor. They didn't see a billionaire's daughter. No. They saw a child who had been afraid to even leave her chair, now glowing with joy as she found her courage. The father stood slowly, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of his chair. He couldn't sit anymore. His daughter, his fragile, broken daughter, was dancing. He had dreamed of this moment, prayed for it in silence at night when no one was around, and now it was happening in front of him. Tears rolled down his face. Before he could stop them, he didn't wipe them away. For once, he didn't care who saw. The world could see him cry, because nothing mattered except the miracle unfolding in front of his eyes. The music shifted into something faster, brighter, and Lila didn't stop. She kept spinning with the children, her hair flying, her cheeks flushed pink from excitement. Every time she twirled, her laughter rang out louder. The fear that had clung to her like a shadow was slipping away with each step she took. The waitress stepped back, letting Lila have the moment for herself. She didn't want to steal the spotlight. She only wanted to give the girl the courage to shine. Watching Lila dance filled her own eyes with tears. She remembered herself as a child, wishing someone had done the same for her. And now, by helping this little girl, it felt like she had healed a part of her own heart too. The guests started clapping along with the music, encouraging the children. Lila didn't notice them, or maybe she didn't care anymore. For the first time in so long, she wasn't thinking about who was watching. She was just dancing, living in the music, letting her heart breathe. The father stepped closer to the floor, his lips trembling as he whispered her name. She saw him, and instead of running back, she waved at him with the brightest smile. That smile crushed him and healed him all at once. He pressed his hands over his chest, as though to hold his breaking heart together. Gratitude poured through him not only toward his daughter, but toward the young waitress who had given her this chance. Without her, none of this would have happened. As the song ended, the children cheered and clapped for each other. Lila clapped, too, her face glowing with pride. She had done it. She had stepped onto the dance floor and found her courage again. When she ran back toward her father, she leaped into his arms, laughing breathlessly. "Daddy, I danced," she exclaimed, her voice ringing with excitement. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair as tears streamed down his cheeks. "Yes, my darling," he whispered hoarsely. "You danced. You really danced." Behind them, the waitress stood quietly, smiling through her own tears. She didn't need recognition. The sight of Lila in her father's arms, laughing freely, was enough. It was more than enough. The father lifted his head, his eyes finding hers across the room. He mouthed the words "thank you," his expression filled with emotions he couldn't begin to explain. She nodded softly, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. That night, in the middle of a crowded ballroom, courage had bloomed from the smallest seed of kindness. And for one little girl, the world no longer felt so frightening. After the music faded and the children's laughter settled into quiet chatter, the ballroom seemed to glow with a soft, golden light. Lila sat beside her father, still flushed from excitement, still giggling softly under her breath. The shy, fearful little girl from earlier that evening now looked like someone reborn. She no longer clung tightly to her father, though she kept a hand in his, her confidence slowly growing with every smile she gave him. Her eyes were bright and curious, scanning the room with a newfound sense of wonder rather than fear. The father couldn't take his eyes off her. Each laugh, each small gesture, was a miracle to him. He had never imagined that a night meant for a formal event, with people dressed in their finest, could become so life-changing. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for seeing his daughter happy again, but for witnessing the quiet, powerful impact of human kindness. That kindness had come from a young waitress, someone who had nothing to gain and everything to give. He looked around, and in the corner of the room, he found her. She was standing slightly apart, watching them with a gentle smile, her hands clasped in front of her apron. There was humility in the way she observed, as if she didn't realize just how monumental her actions had been. To most, she was just a waitress doing her job. But to him and his daughter, she was nothing short of extraordinary. He excused himself from the chair and walked toward her, each step heavy with emotion. His suit, expensive and perfectly tailored, did nothing to shield him from the raw feelings coursing through his chest. His hands trembled slightly as he reached her, and he stopped just a respectful distance away. He wanted to say so many things, but words felt small compared to the gratitude in his heart. "Thank you," he began, his voice catching slightly. "I don't even know where to start, but thank you. You've changed my daughter's night, maybe even her life. I don't know how to explain it, but you've given her something I've been trying to give her for so long." The waitress's cheeks flushed, and she shook her head softly. "I didn't do much," she said humbly. "I just noticed her. That's all?" "No," he said firmly, his eyes locking with hers. "You did more than I ever could. You gave her courage. You gave her hope. You made her feel safe. That's bigger than anything money can buy." She smiled, a small, almost shy smile, and looked down for a moment. "I'm glad she felt safe. That's enough for me," she said quietly, almost as if she didn't believe it herself. But he couldn't let it end there. Something inside him told him that a person who could give so much kindness deserved more than just gratitude. He needed to help her, to make sure her life could be better too, just as she had helped his daughter find happiness in such a short time. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. She nodded. "What's your life like outside of this job? Do you have the chance to do what you really want?" Her expression shifted slightly, and he saw a flicker of hesitation followed by quiet honesty. I work a lot," she admitted. "I have to help my family, pay bills, make ends meet. Dreams. Well, they're hard to think about when you're busy just surviving." He felt a pang in his chest. Here was someone who had given so much of herself, yet struggled to have the opportunity she deserved. He took a deep breath. "I want to help," he said, and his tone was firm, not a question, but a promise. "I want to help you achieve your dreams. Whatever it is you want to do, I can help make it possible." The waitress blinked in surprise, disbelief flashing across her face. You're extraordinary," he interrupted gently. "What you did tonight. It changed everything. For my daughter, it's worth more than anything money can buy. And I don't want to just say thank you. I want to make sure you have the life you deserve too." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wasn't used to people believing in her, not like this. She wasn't used to someone seeing her not as a worker, not as someone invisible, but as someone capable of making a difference. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he said, placing a reassuring hand lightly on her shoulder. "Just know that I mean it. Your kindness has changed our lives tonight. I want to help you change yours." The waitress swallowed hard, feeling emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, relief, and a deep sense of worth. For once, she realized that her life didn't have to be limited by circumstance. Someone had recognized her heart, and that recognition carried more power than she ever imagined. Meanwhile, Lila ran up to them, tugging gently at her father's hand. "Daddy," she said, breathless and wide-eyed, "can we come dance again?" The father smiled, tears still streaking down his face. "Not just yet, sweetheart. but soon. He looked at the waitress, and Lila's little eyes followed his gaze. She could sense the connection forming between her father and this kind woman. She didn't understand it fully, but she felt safe, happy, and alive. The father knelt beside Lila, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lila," he said, softly, "you were amazing tonight. You found your courage, and it's all because someone cared enough to notice you." Lila nodded, her small smile bright and honest. She didn't need words beyond that to understand. She had felt it. The care, the warmth, the safety was a feeling she would carry with her far beyond the ballroom. The father rose and extended his hand toward the waitress again. "Please," he said gently, "let me help you, not because of me, but because of what you've given to her. You deserve to have your dreams too." She hesitated, then slowly placed her hand in his. It was the beginning of a promise, not just of financial support or opportunity, but of belief. Belief in her potential, belief in her worth, and belief in the kindness she had freely shared with a frightened child that night. The ballroom continued to sparkle with light, laughter, and music, but in one quiet corner, a miracle had unfolded. A little girl had danced again, a father had witnessed a true act of kindness, and a young waitress had found hope in return. It was a moment that changed all of their lives forever. For the billionaire father, it was a lesson in humility and gratitude. For Lila, it was the first taste of courage and joy in years. And for the waitress, it was the beginning of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. All because a single hug had reminded a little girl, Landa Virioni and her, that love and kindness have the power to change the world.